My son walked into my garden where I was deadheading roses and said without preamble, "I sold your house to pay for our vacation to the Maldives. You have one day to pack your things." And I just smiled because what Brian didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known in his greed and arrogance, was that the house wasn't in my name anymore. It was in a living trust that Tom and I set up 3 years before he died, with me as the controlling trustee and Brian as beneficiary only upon my death, which meant he couldn't sell it without my signature, couldn't touch it without my consent. But he tried anyway because he and Tiffany were $40,000 in debt and had already paid $47,000 for their dream vacation they couldn't afford. If you want to know how a 68-year-old widow whose son announced he'd stolen her home watched him bring movers the next day only to have my attorney Sarah Morrison stop them at the door, watched him escalate to filing emergency guardianship claiming I was mentally incompetent, watched him bring a geriatric specialist to my garden to declare me unfit, then sat in court while the judge denied his petition with disgust, ordered him to pay my legal fees, and referred him to Adult Protective Services for investigation, and how that investigation cost Brian his job as a financial consultant, cost them their townhouse to foreclosure, cost them the entire $47,000 vacation when the resort refused refunds, cost them everything while I renovated my kitchen, expanded my book club, started a foundation for elder financial protection, and finally lived freely in the house I'd fought to keep. Hit that subscribe button right now, because this is about learning that the most dangerous children are the ones who see your assets as their inheritance before you're dead. That "I'm just worried about you" is code for "I want control of your money." And that sometimes the sweetest justice isn't revenge, but watching someone who tried to make you homeless lose their own home while you flourish in the sanctuary they tried to steal. I'm from a small town. Where are you watching from? My name is Margaret. I'm 69 years old now, but when this story began, I was 68. 1 year into widowhood after losing my husband Tom to a heart attack. For 37 years, I'd lived in the same two-story colonial house on Maple Street, the house where I'd raised Brian, where Tom and I had celebrated countless Christmases, where every creaking floorboard held a memory. After Tom passed, the house became both my sanctuary and my burden, too big for one person, perhaps, but filled with a lifetime I wasn't ready to abandon. Brian had always been my pride. A successful financial consultant, married to Tiffany, a real estate agent with perfectly highlighted hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. They lived 40 minutes away in a modern townhouse. Our relationship had been cordial. Sunday dinners once a month, birthday calls, the usual dance of adult children with busy lives. But 6 months ago, something shifted. It started small. Brian began asking questions about the house. Questions that seemed innocent at first. "Mom, have you thought about downsizing? This place must be expensive to maintain. Wouldn't a nice apartment be easier?" I'd laugh them off, changing the subject to his work, his life, anything else. Then the visits increased. Brian and Tiffany would drop by unannounced. Tiffany's sharp eyes assessing every room like she was already measuring for new furniture. She'd comment on the outdated kitchen, the inefficient heating system, how much the property taxes must cost. I felt scrutinized in my own home, like a specimen under glass. "We're just worried about you, Margaret," Tiffany would say, her voice dripping with false concern. "A woman your age, all alone in this big house, what if you fall? What if something happens?" I was 68, not 90. I still gardened, drove myself to book club, volunteered at the library twice a week, but they spoke to me like I was already senile, already helpless. The phone calls became more frequent too. Brian would call late at night, his voice tight with what he called concern. Had I considered a reverse mortgage? Had I updated my will? Did I have a healthcare proxy? Questions that felt less like care and more like inventory. Then came that Tuesday afternoon in October. I was in my garden, deadheading the last of the autumn roses, when I heard the car pull up. Brian's silver sedan. He climbed out alone, no Tiffany this time, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach at the expression on his face. Not concern, not worry, something harder, something final. "Mom, we need to talk." He didn't wait for an invitation, just walked past me into the house. I followed him inside, wiping soil from my hands, trying to calm the sudden racing of my heart. He stood in my living room, where I'd rocked him as a baby, and the words came out flat, rehearsed, like he'd practiced them. "I sold your house to pay for our vacation. You have one day to pack your things." The world tilted. I actually gripped the back of Tom's old armchair to steady myself. "You what?" "Tiffany and I have been planning a trip to the Maldives for our 10th anniversary. We deserve it after everything we've been through." He said it like it was obvious, like it was reasonable. "The sale closes tomorrow. The new owners want to move in by the weekend." My mouth opened, but no sound came out. How could he? When did he? Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Brian continued, his eyes avoiding mine. We found you a nice assisted living facility. 1 bedroom, all utilities included. You'll be much happier there, safer, safer. That word again, I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. When had this happened? When had my boy, my sweet boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them bouquets, become this cold, calculating man standing in my home telling me he'd stolen it from under me? But here's what Brian didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known in his greed and his arrogance. The house wasn't actually in my name anymore. I smiled, a small, quiet smile that made him falter for just a moment. Is that so? I said softly. Well then, I suppose you'd better tell me which assisted living facility. After Brian left, after he'd handed me a brochure for Sunset Gardens Senior Living and driven away in his expensive sedan, I sat in Tom's armchair for exactly 20 minutes. Letting the shock wash over me like cold water, my hands trembled, my chest felt tight. Had my own son really just tried to sell my house without my permission? I forced myself to breathe slowly, to think clearly. Panic wouldn't help me now. I needed to understand what had actually happened, what Brian thought he'd done, because one thing was certain, he believed he'd succeeded. I pulled out my laptop and began searching for property records. It took me 40 minutes and 3 phone calls, but I finally reached someone at the county clerk's office. Ma'am, according to our records, 247 Maple Street is held in a living trust. The Sanderson Family Trust, established in 2018, you're listed as the trustee. I thanked her and hung up, a grim smile touching my lips. Of course, Tom and I had set up the trust 3 years before he died, following our estate attorney's advice. The house wasn't in my name, it was in the trust's name, with me as the controlling trustee and Brian as the beneficiary upon my death. Brian couldn't sell it without my signature, without my consent, but he'd tried anyway. Had he forged documents? Had he lied to a buyer? Or was this all an elaborate bluff to frighten me into signing the house over? I needed to know more. I needed evidence. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I called Brian's colleague, Robert Chen, whom I'd met several times at company events. Mrs. Sanderson, what a pleasant surprise, Robert said when he answered. Robert, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has Brian been acting strangely at work lately? Money troubles, unusual behavior. There was a long pause, too long. Mrs. Sanderson, I probably shouldn't say this, but Brian took out a significant loan last month. He told the partners it was for a business investment, but there's been talk. Some people think he's in over his head financially. My stomach dropped. How significant? 6 figures. And between you and me, he's been distracted, missing deadlines. His biggest client threatened to leave last week. Brian was in financial trouble, serious trouble, and instead of coming to me for help, instead of being honest, he decided to steal my home. But why the vacation story? I opened my laptop and navigated to Facebook, another thing my son assumed I couldn't do. Tiffany's page was public, filled with posts about luxury brands, exotic destinations, and inspirational quotes about manifesting abundance. I scrolled back through the last 6 months and found what I was looking for. Dozens of posts about their upcoming dream vacation, photos of resort brochures, countdowns to their anniversary trip. They'd been planning this for months, posting about it, bragging about it, building expectations with their friends and social media followers. And now they needed money to make it happen. My money, my house. I sat back, feeling something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. This wasn't just about financial desperation. This was about image, about keeping up appearances, about Tiffany's perfect Instagram life. They decided my home, my security, my memories were worth less than their vacation photos. That's when the plan began to form. I wouldn't run. I wouldn't hide. I would let them think they'd won. I would play the confused, helpless old woman they clearly believed I was. And while they were busy congratulating themselves, I would gather every piece of evidence I needed. And then I would make sure they faced real consequences. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd hoped I'd never need. Sarah Morrison, the toughest estate attorney in 3 counties and Tom's former law school roommate. Sarah, I said when she answered, I need your help. My son just tried to steal my house. Sarah Morrison arrived at my house the next morning at 9 o'clock sharp, carrying a leather briefcase and an expression that meant business. I'd known Sarah for over 40 years, since she and Tom studied together at Georgetown. She'd built a reputation as someone who didn't lose cases, especially when family members tried to exploit the elderly. Tell me everything, she said, settling into the same armchair where Brian had delivered his ultimatum. I walked her through it all. Brian's increasingly intrusive questions, Tiffany's assessments of my property, the late-night phone calls. And finally, the bombshell announcement. Sarah took notes, her jaw tightening with each detail. Do you have any documentation, texts, emails, recordings? I shook my head. It all happened so fast. But Sarah, here's the thing, he can't actually sell the house, can he? It's in the trust. Not without your signature as trustee. No, she pulled out her laptop, which means either he's forged documents or he's bluffing to pressure you into signing. While Sarah worked, I made coffee and tried to steady my nerves. What would Brian do when he realized I hadn't packed, that I hadn't left? He'd said the sale closed today. Would he show up with moving trucks? My phone buzzed, a text from Brian, "Mom, have you started packing? The movers will be there at 3 p.m. My hands shook as I showed Sarah the message. Don't respond yet, she advised. Let's see if movers actually show up. If they do, I'll handle it. At 2:45 p.m., a white moving van pulled up to my curb. Two men climbed out, checking a clipboard. I watched from my window as they approached my front door. Sarah stood beside me, phone already recording. Let them knock, don't open the door. The knock came, 3 sharp raps. Mrs. Sanderson, we're here from Reliable Movers. Your son Brian hired us to help with your relocation. Sarah opened the door, her attorney face firmly in place. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm Sarah Morrison, Mrs. Sanderson's legal counsel. Can I see your work order? The men exchanged confused glances. The older one handed over a sheet of paper. Sarah examined it carefully, then looked up with steel in her eyes. This work order was placed by Brian Sanderson, but he has no legal authority to initiate a move from this property. The house is held in a trust with Margaret Sanderson as the sole trustee. I'm afraid you've been hired under false pretenses. But Mr. Sanderson said his mother agreed to move. Mrs. Sanderson has agreed to no such thing. In fact, she had no knowledge of your company being hired. Sarah handed back the paperwork. I'd suggest you contact Mr. Sanderson for payment, because you won't be moving anything from this address today. The movers left confused and clearly annoyed. As their van pulled away, another car arrived, Brian's sedan with Tiffany in the passenger seat. I watched my son climb out, his face already red with anger. He must have gotten a call from the moving company. Tiffany followed, her expression sharp and calculating. Sarah stepped onto my porch before they could reach the door. Mr. Sanderson, Mrs. Sanderson, I am Sarah Morrison, representing Margaret Sanderson. I need to inform you that any attempt to remove property from or claim ownership of this house without Mrs. Sanderson's written consent constitutes attempted fraud and elder abuse. Brian's face went white. Who the hell are you, Mom? What is this? I appeared in the doorway behind Sarah, feeling stronger than I had in months. Sarah is my attorney, Brian, and she's here because you tried to sell my house without my permission. I was helping you. Brian's voice rose, his composure cracking. You can't take care of this place anymore. You're putting yourself in danger. That's not your decision to make, Sarah said coldly. Mrs. Sanderson is of sound mind, perfectly capable of managing her own affairs. What you've attempted here is illegal. Tiffany grabbed Brian's arm, whispering urgently, but he shook her off. I'm your son. Everything you have should be mine anyway. You're just being selfish, holding on to this house when we need. He stopped abruptly, realizing what he'd almost said. When you need what, Brian? I asked quietly. Money for your Maldives vacation, money to cover the 6-figure loan you took out at work. His eyes widened. How did you? I may be 68, but I'm not senile. I can still make phone calls. I can still do research. I stepped forward, feeling decades of motherly patience crystallizing into something harder. You tried to steal my home to fund your vacation. You were willing to make me homeless for a beach resort. We were going to take care of you. The assisted living place is nice. A 1-bedroom facility where I'd lose my independence, my memories, my entire life, while you and Tiffany post Instagram photos from the Maldives, paid for with my house. Tiffany's mask finally cracked. Maybe if you weren't so stubborn about accepting help, we wouldn't have had to. Had to what? Sarah interrupted. Commit elder fraud, because that's what this is, and I have everything documented now. They left Brian radiating fury, Tiffany in tears, their desperation visible. For just a moment, I saw fear in my son's eyes. Good, let him be afraid. The next escalation came 3 weeks later. They arrived on a Sunday morning. Brian and Tiffany, followed by an older woman I'd never seen before. I was in my garden pruning hydrangeas when I heard the car doors slam. They all wore carefully constructed expressions of concern, like actors playing roles. Mom, Brian said, his voice gentle, controlled. We need to talk. Please just hear us out. I didn't invite them in. I stood in my garden, dirt on my knees, and waited. The older woman stepped forward, extending her hand. Mrs. Sanderson, I'm Dr. Patricia Henshaw. I'm a geriatric care specialist. Brian asked me to assess your living situation. A doctor. They'd brought a doctor to declare me incompetent. I didn't agree to any assessment, I said calmly. Of course not. And you don't have to, Dr. Henshaw said smoothly. But as a medical professional, I can tell you that many seniors don't realize when they need help. The signs can be subtle: forgetting to pay bills, neglecting home maintenance, isolation from family. I pay all my bills on time. My home is well maintained, and I'm not isolated. I looked directly at Brian. I'm surrounded by people who actually care about my well-being. Tiffany's mask cracked slightly. We brought Dr. Henshaw at our own expense because we're worried about your Maldives vacation being canceled. Brian's jaw tightened. Mom, we've canceled the trip. We canceled it because our family is more important than any vacation. I almost believed him for just a moment, but then I caught Tiffany's expression, a flash of resentment quickly hidden. Show me the cancellation confirmation, I said. If you canceled the trip, show me the email, the refund proof. Brian's face reddened. I can't believe after everything you still don't trust us. You tried to sell my house without my permission, Brian. You hired movers to evict me. Why should I trust you? Dr. Henshaw cleared her throat. This kind of paranoia and suspicion is actually quite common in seniors experiencing cognitive decline. The inability to trust family members, the belief that loved ones are out to get you, these are red flags. The manipulation was so smooth, so professional. I appreciate your concern, Dr. Henshaw, but I'm not experiencing cognitive decline. I'm experiencing attempted financial exploitation by my son. I pulled out my phone. Would you like to see the documented evidence, the moving company work order? The credit card statements showing the paid vacation. The doctor's professional smile faltered. They left Dr. Henshaw clearly regretting her involvement, Brian and Tiffany radiating fury. We tried to do this the nice way, Brian said, his voice cold. But you've made your choice, you'll regret it. 6 weeks later, the summons came. Brian was filing for emergency guardianship, claiming I was mentally incompetent and unable to care for myself. The hearing was scheduled for October 17th at the county courthouse. Sarah assembled our defense with military precision. Bank records proving I managed my finances perfectly. Medical records showing excellent cognitive function. Testimonials from my book club, the library, my support group. Security footage of Brian's confrontations. The moving company's documentation. Everything. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, fluorescent lit and institutional. Brian and Tiffany sat with their attorney. They'd also brought Dr. Henshaw and character witnesses. Judge Patricia Carmichael entered, a black woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Brian's attorney presented his case, painting me as a tragic figure who couldn't see her own decline. Dr. Henshaw testified about observed signs of cognitive decline. Then came Brian himself. His performance was masterful. He spoke softly, emotionally, about a devoted son watching his beloved mother deteriorate. I made a mistake with the moving company, he said, his voice breaking. I was so worried about her safety. I thought if I could just show her how much easier life could be. I shouldn't have acted without her explicit consent, but it came from love, pure love and concern. No mention of the Maldives, no mention of his debt. Then it was Sarah's turn. Mr. Sanderson, you testified that you acted out of concern for your mother's safety. Is that correct? Yes, and yet you hired movers without informing her. Isn't that right? As I said, it was a mistake that coincided with a $47,000 payment to a luxury resort in the Maldives. The courtroom went silent. Brian's face paled. We had a trip planned, but a trip you still have planned, correct? Your attorney stated you canceled it, but you actually just postponed the dates, haven't you? Sarah produced the evidence. Prints of Tiffany's social media posts from 2 weeks ago, screenshots of resort confirmation emails, credit card statements showing payment plans. Your Honor, this isn't about concern for Mrs. Sanderson's well-being. This is about financial desperation. Mr. Sanderson is in significant debt and attempted to access his mother's home equity to fund his lifestyle. She called me to the stand next. I spoke clearly, calmly, walking through my daily routine, my volunteer work, my book club, my financial management, my garden, my friendships. I presented my medical records, my clean bill of health. My bank statements, every bill paid on time, savings intact. Mrs. Sanderson, why do you believe your son filed for guardianship? I looked directly at Brian. Because I refused to let him steal my home to pay for his vacation. Because I wouldn't be bullied into giving up my independence. Because I stood up for myself. The judge called for a recess. 20 minutes later, she returned with her decision. I've reviewed all evidence presented, and I find no merit whatsoever in this petition. Mrs. Sanderson is clearly competent, financially stable, and living independently without issue. She looked at Brian with barely concealed disgust. Mr. Sanderson, filing frivolous guardianship petitions wastes court resources and constitutes a form of elder abuse. I'm denying your petition and ordering you to pay Mrs. Sanderson's legal fees. Additionally, I'm referring this case to Adult Protective Services for investigation into possible financial exploitation. Brian's face crumpled. Tiffany burst into tears, real tears this time, of defeat and fury. I walked out of that courthouse with my head high, Sarah beside me, my freedom and dignity intact. I'd won. The dominoes fell faster than I'd anticipated. The Adult Protective Services investigation led to Brian's employer being notified, standard procedure for financial professionals who demonstrate exploitation behavior. His firm placed him on administrative leave. When the partners discovered he'd taken a loan under false pretenses and attempted to defraud his own mother, the decision was quick: termination for cause, no severance, no references. Tiffany's real estate license came under scrutiny. Her brokerage quietly let her go. Reputation is everything in real estate. The Maldives trip, postponed twice, was finally canceled by necessity. The resort refused a refund, keeping their $47,000. Brian's mortgage company called me. Their payment was 60 days overdue. The bank was initiating foreclosure on their townhouse. 3 months after the court hearing, I received a handwritten letter from Brian. "Mom, we lost everything. The house, our jobs, our friends, our reputation. We're living in a rental apartment, barely making ends meet. I know you think I deserve this. Maybe I do, but I need you to understand I never meant to hurt you. I was desperate, drowning, and I made terrible choices. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for money. I just need you to know that I'm sorry." I read it twice, then filed it with the rest of the documentation. Sarah called with news. Brian's attorney contacted me. They want to negotiate a settlement. Brian will sign away any future claim to your estate, won't contest your will, and will agree to supervised visitation only in exchange for you not pursuing further legal action. "Draw up the agreement," I said. "But I want one more condition. Brian must complete a financial counseling program and provide proof of completion." The agreement was signed 2 weeks later. Brian and Tiffany forfeited all claims to my property. Brian enrolled in court-mandated financial counseling. I updated my will. The house would go to charity upon my death, specifically to an organization supporting seniors facing financial abuse by family members. Brian would receive nothing. Life after the settlement was sweeter than I'd imagined. I renovated new kitchen cabinets, updated bathrooms, a beautiful sunroom addition. The book club expanded. I hosted regularly, filling my dining room with laughter and spirited debates. I took on more volunteer work at the library, eventually coordinating their senior literacy program, teaching older adults to protect themselves from scams, including financial exploitation by family members. I told my story at support group fundraisers. Your children don't own you, they don't own your assets. You have the right to protect yourself even from family, especially from family. I started dating again, coffee dates with a retired professor named David who made me laugh and never once asked about my finances. My garden flourished. I won second place for my hydrangeas. Meanwhile, updates about Brian filtered through occasionally. They'd lost the townhouse, lived in a small rental. Tiffany worked as an administrative assistant. Brian sold insurance, making a fraction of his former salary. They'd filed for bankruptcy. 6 months after the settlement, I received one final letter from Brian, shorter, more bitter. "Mom, I hope you're happy. I hope your house and your lawyer were worth destroying your only son. We're barely surviving while you live in luxury. But I guess that's what you wanted all along, to punish me for one mistake." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say to someone who still saw himself as the victim. Instead, I finalized my legacy plan. The Margaret Sanderson Foundation for Elder Financial Protection, providing legal assistance to seniors facing exploitation by family members. 1 year after Brian's attempted fraud, I hosted a garden party. 50 people came. We celebrated under string lights, eating catered food, drinking champagne, laughing until dark. Someone asked if I ever regretted how things turned out with Brian. I looked around at my beautiful home filled with people who genuinely cared about me. "Not for a second," I said, and I meant it. I'm 69 now. I live in my home, the home I fought for, defended, and won. Brian tried to steal my sanctuary to fund a vacation. He tried to have me declared incompetent to access my assets. He lost his job, his house, his reputation, and $47,000. I lost a son I thought I had, but gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that I'm strong enough to protect myself, even from the people who claim to love me most. Share your story with us. If your adult child has asked intrusive questions about your finances disguised as concern, if someone has told you you're too old to manage your own home while eyeing your equity, if you've been pressured to downsize so they can access your assets, if family has tried to convince you that loving them means giving them control, if anyone has ever announced they sold something that wasn't theirs to sell, if you've faced guardianship attempts by children who want your money more than your well-being, know this. You are not obligated to impoverish yourself to fund someone else's lifestyle. "I'm worried about you" often means "I want access to your money," and the strongest act of love you can do is loving yourself enough to say no. Trust your instincts, document everything, get an attorney, and never, ever let anyone convince you that protecting yourself is selfish. Your home is yours, your money is yours, your life is yours. At 68, at 70, at 80, you still have the power to fight. And sometimes the people who lose everything are the ones who tried to take everything. Choose yourself, protect yourself. You're never too old to win.